That's the good. Why did not permit? When you see 100 people, you know. And I always brought, like, I thought I brought my daughter too. You did? I've got my that's national, right? That's national. Not like a lawyer. It's a board. Is the other side open? Oh, yeah. If it's open, then it doesn't give you a taste. Oh, okay. Which is the other thing people don't. But late at night, that's just what you hear. All right, great.
I just want to let you know we're waiting for our last member who's coming late from a game. Good evening, and welcome to the West Hartford Board of Education meeting. Now that Megan is actually here, she got here early from her sporting event, so she could all be on time. So may we please have the roll call?
Mrs. Blanks,
Here.
Dr. Greenberg,
Here?
Mr. Levine,
Here.
Mr. Paul Uke,
Here.
Ms. Poland,
Here.
Dr. Thomas Farquharson,
Here.
Mr. Zdanowitz,
Here.
Student Representative Gus Bacon,
Here.
and Megan Strip-Cave.
Here.
In honor of your game, Megan, can I ask you to lead us in the pledge, please? Oh. No wonder.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. There's no revision to the agenda order, and alas, it is too early in the year to have student participation. So we're going to come straight to public communications, beginning with the American Legion.
Good evening, and thank you for hearing us out this evening. My name is Mo Fredette, past post commander of the American Legion, Hayes Village Post 96. And joining me this evening is Jeff Cole, our post commander, and Patrick Harold, our senior vice commander. We want to address the board very briefly this evening to acknowledge the support our post has received over the years for our youth programs. The American Legion will celebrate its 100th anniversary next year, and our post will reach this milestone in 2022. Over 14,000 American Legion posts throughout the world are charged with our Constitution and bylaws with serving our veterans, supporting national security, advancing Americanism, and mentoring our youth. In mentoring our youth, we recognize the students in high school and middle schools annually with citizenship awards, Veterans Day interfaces with students at all levels, recognition of young men and women graduating from high school electing to pursue service in our armed forces, American Legion Baseball, State Police Academy, our Boys and Girls State programs. I'd like to take a moment to tell you a little bit about our Boys and Girls States programs and the experience of two of our students who attended. Boys State and Girls State are held, the boys at Eastern Connecticut State University and the girls at Post University. And the schools select students to attend. And it's a dynamic program where they learn about how government is formed and how government works. A very good experience. Right, Megan? Yes. Two of those students, one was Andy Tran. Andy is a senior at Conard High School. We invited them to address our monthly meeting in September. And Andy explained his hesitation and his expectations in going to Boys State, that he would kind of sit in the sidelines. He did more than sit in the sidelines. He put his name up for election and was elected governor of Boys State. And dynamic young man with a great future. The other participant was Megan. Megan attended Girls State, and after attending, she wrote a letter to the president of our auxiliary who sponsored Girls State, and it's such a tremendous letter, we actually published it in our newsletter, which we'll leave with you this evening. In listening to these two young people talk, it gave us great confidence that the future of our country is going to be in great hands. They're very, very dynamic. The success of our programs would not be possible without the support of our schools and the people who educate and guide these young men and women. In acknowledging that support, we would like to present the West Hartford Public Schools with a certificate of appreciation. If I may read it. Certificate of appreciation. This certificate of appreciation is gratefully presented to West Hartford Public Schools in recognition of sincere and appreciation of outstanding service and assistance which contributed to the advancement of the American Legion, Hayes Village Post 96, West Hartford, Connecticut. Presented by Hayes Village Post 96, Department of Connecticut, the 2nd day of October, 2018. Jeff. Can I leave these with you? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you all for both for your service and for this wonderful certificate, which I will give into Tom's careful care so we can put it up. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And bravo, Megan. Oh, right. We also have, so I think it says date one, Bryant. Did I read that correctly?
You got 3 minutes to
I was just
speak.
going to say, come on up. You guys. No, but if you have anything you'd like to say, now's your moment. Thank you. Can you say that right into the microphone? Exactly. Okay. We have no unfinished business, and so we're moving right along to new business and the authorization for the child nutrition agreement. Can I have a motion that we authorize the superintendent of schools to sign the agreement for the child nutrition program and to sign claims for reimbursement?
Second.
Discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Well, amazingly enough, that passed unanimously. I also call for a motion that the Board of Education authorize the Director of Finance and Planning to sign claims for reimbursement in the absence of the superintendent.
So moved.
Discussion? Oh, Chip's okay. All right, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Go and feed our children. Thank you. Next, that's right. Next, I'd like a motion that the Board of Education ratify the negotiated reopener agreement between the West Hartford Board of Education, professional employees, SEIU, CSEA, Local 2001, AFL-CIO, and the Board of Education for the period July 1st, 2018 through June 30th, 2021. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Second? Discussion?
Yep, so good evening, everyone. Before you for approval is the ratified.
So, try
Is
again.
it me?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Cheryl cut you off.
We're good?
It was intentional, yeah.
So before you for approval is a ratified reopener agreement for our professional employees. Our professional employees are a group of approximately 30 employees who represent members of our information technology department, our budget and business office, our transportation department, various administrative assistants around the district, as well as the registrars at both of our high schools. And you may remember it was a year ago, almost to the date, that the board had ratified a 5-year agreement with this group. And if you remember last year at this time, we were dealing with a very uncertain budget, state budget situation. In fact, we didn't have a budget at that time. So what we had agreed to and what the board had ratified at that time was a 5-year agreement with 2 years of wages agreed to at that point, which represented 16 and 17 and 17 and 18. And those increases for those 2 years were 1.5%. So what's before you this evening is the reopener agreement. So we reopened the contract and settled the wages for the final 3 years of the agreement. And that calls for a 2.5% or 2.25% increase in wages over the course of those 3 years. So the total 5-year agreement averages out to 1.95%, which is below average for settlements around with our other 11 bargaining units within the district, which has been averaging around 2.25%. And then the average around the state for 18-19 was 2.28%, and the average for 19-20 was 2.34%. So that 1.95% falls below those state averages as well. The professional employees had also agreed to significant healthcare reform as well. And they will be joining our teachers, our administrators, and our nurses as the fourth group who will be in the high deductible health plan on a mandatory basis. So the high deductible health plan calls for a $2,000 individual deductible and a $4,000 family deductible. And the board will fund 62.5% of that deductible in the first year. And then in the second and third years, that contribution will drop to 50% for the final 2 years of the contract. The premium cost share will increase from 16% to 17.5% over the course of the 3 years. And then in terms of pension reform, you will recall several contracts ago, we moved all of our employees into a hybrid plan, our new employees. So for the existing employees that are still in our pension plan, we've increased their pension contribution from 4.5% to 5.75%. Which is a 27% increase in their contribution into the pension plan over the next 3 years, which is significant. So that summarizes the reopener portion of this agreement, and the three of us would be happy to answer any questions that the board had before voting.
Any questions? You ready to vote? Okay. All in favor of ratifying the negotiated reopener agreement between the West Hartford Board of Education Professional Employees SEIU CSEA Local 2001 AFL-CIO and the Board of Education for the period of July 1st, 2018 through June 30th, 2021, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, now we move to staff communication and reports, beginning with the superintendent's report.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I want to start with sad news. Unexpectedly this weekend, in our IT office, the executive assistant there, Tammy McPherson, passed away unexpectedly Sunday night, and our thoughts are with her family and all of her friends are upstairs, all of her friends upstairs on the 4th floor, and actually throughout the building and out at the schools. Wonderful person who will be sorely missed, and it is just a very sad, unexpected loss. So our thoughts go out to her and her family. Going back, because of it happened in September, and I thought this had already been mentioned, but it actually happened after our first meeting. I want to congratulate Juan Melian, who was the honoree and the winner, recognized by the Bridge as the Build No Fences Award winner for this year, in what he does to build no fences in the community, but instead to bring people together. And what Juan does, anybody that's been at Charter Oak and watched Juan interact with kids, with families, it's hard not to be around Juan with people and be jealous of how much people apparently like him. But truly a wonderful person, and nobody could be more deserving than Juan, so we're very excited for that. A series of good news events for our high school also. The National Merit Scholarship Program named their semifinalists, and West Hartford once again had a significant number from both high schools. From Hall High School, Joshua Fernandez, Avery Glagovich, Alexandra Lutkova, Mateo Maturana, and Shara Reamer. And it honored Ava De La Cruz, Arjun Jagdavan, Ganesh Pedersen, and Matthew Vitelli were all semifinalists in the National Merit Scholarship Program. So they're amongst the top 16,000 students, 16,000 semifinalists, over 1.6 million American juniors who engage in the National Merit Scholarship qualifying competition, which begins with I shouldn't call it a competition, recognition, which begins with the PSAT and MSQT exam. So congratulations. Another piece that was kind of buried in a report, and I'll get it out publicly. Yash Nair, who graduated from Conard last year, was the state AP scholar. There's one male, one female announced every year, and it's total number of exams with over a 3 score and with a high overall average. And it's 3 of the last 4 years that a graduate from Connerton Hall has been the state AP Scholar, which is a stunning achievement. And that brings me into, I was actually in Boston this morning at a presentation, and I talked to the person presenting because I was surprised, because then it's going to be in Chicago tomorrow and Los Angeles in 2 days, where they were talking about AP Capstone, which we know we've had. We were a charter school in AP Capstone. The College Board selected us. We were the first public schools in Connecticut and in New England to offer AP Capstone 4 years ago. There are now 1,100 schools that participate worldwide in AP Capstone. 4,800 students last year earned the distinction of AP Capstone diploma awarded to them, which is you've taken and gotten a 3 or above in both AP Seminar and AP Research. And what was really cool about this presentation, and I didn't know, and the person presenting didn't know I was there, presented Connerton Hall as the models and handed out 8 sample papers that were all Connerton Hall sample papers to go through it. And it turns out that of the 4,800 students in total worldwide that earned the distinction, Conard had 11 AP Capstone diplomas awarded, and Hall had 11 AP Capstone diplomas awarded, which accounted for 23% of all of the AP Capstone diplomas in New England, which is just really cool. And the works that were cited ranged just incredible topics. This is something that it's nice when you hear West Hartford and you're somewhere else and your ears perk up. Wait a minute. So it was really fascinating and interesting. So good work to our teachers and our scholars and our students that have earned that designation. So that's that.
Thank you. That's really amazingly wonderful news all around. Okay, I think next is staff reports and board discussions, including the state assessment results, which is, of course, the SATs with Mr. Paul Vicinas. Welcome.
As Paul comes up, this is the time of year where we basically, over the next 3 meetings, go through 3 assessments. These are the regular board reports every year on our results and our assessments from West Hartford. And I'll defer to Paul in his presentation. I just want to say one thing that I've said since I've become superintendent is that we will be informed by our test scores. We won't be driven by them. In that, I mean, we will look at who's doing what, how are we doing overall. We will make judgments from it, but we will not do drill and kill. We will not base ourselves on just practicing for tests. We believe in that if you get a full education, it'll be reflected in our tests. So with that.
Thank you, Tom. Good evening, everyone. I'll jump right in, give you a quick overview of really just highlight some of the differences between the SAT that you and I may have taken in our youth as opposed to the SAT that Gus and Megan got to enjoy, and go through our overall results and trends for 3 years. I'll talk about why we're looking at a 3-year trend for literacy and math, and the literacy test, otherwise referred to in the report as evidence-based reading and writing, or EBRW for short. And as always, we'll take a look at the results disaggregated across state-defined groups and open it up for questions and discussion. So it was in the spring of 2016 that the College Board announced major changes to the SAT, reframing their test and focusing it on the skills that their research and a depth of research identified as the critical skills for college and career readiness. So the SAT that you and I are probably more familiar with, that we took in our youth, again, had 3 sections. There was a critical reading section, a separate writing section, and mathematics. Those really have been broken into 2 big sections, evidence-based reading and writing put together, along with mathematics, which forms the basis of the state assessment. The College Board does still offer an optional essay item that some colleges may require as part of their packet and some colleges may not. but the essay portion is not part of our state assessment system. And there is plenty of information that can be gleaned from the test in terms of writing skills for our students. The test itself, the existing test, breaks into 6 major components. They look at words in context, commands of evidence, analyzing a source, and the 3 essential areas for mathematics, algebra, problem solving, and advanced math. Across the test, there's informational literacy problems grounded in real-world context, and an analysis of science and social studies. And a very detailed report about all these changes is available to you and to our public on the website. It dates back to 2014 in December. We gave an in-depth, and I think there's just some highlights of that in this report. But the test itself and the meaning of a benchmark score shifted, and the reason, therefore, that we look at 3-year trends is because that 2016 year really represented the baseline for the new SAT and what it means. Part of the major change was the setting of a college and career readiness benchmark, which was defined as the ability to predict with 75% or better likelihood the notion that a freshman in college would achieve a score of 3 or better in the related subject. So the benchmark score for literacy, if I hit benchmark, I have a 75% likelihood or greater of getting a C or better in a humanities class, and in an English language arts class, and in mathematics in whatever the specific mathematics class is. Previously, under the old SAT, the old benchmark, still kind of in and around that 500 range, was based on getting a B- or better average overall across all of your courses in your first year, and it was only a 65% or a 60% likelihood. So it's a little bit more specific. So what they found, and is represented by the dark line there on the graph, they set the benchmark score for evidence-based reading and writing at a 480, and they set the bar in mathematics at a 530. So it's very important to notice that those are 2 different bars, and they're based entirely on what statistics shows us how students perform in college. The graph, a lot of information there. Reading from left to right, obviously the first set of scores is the evidence-based reading and writing, and the scores in blue represent the West Hartford scores over the 3-year period, starting with the very light blue, 2016, followed by 2017 and 18. And you see there in English language arts, while our overall performance is slightly flat, there is a minor dip. It's about a 2% dip for our performance in English language arts after a strong gain in the previous year. That's followed by some orange bands. Those again are the 3-year trends for DERG B, our demographic reference group. And you can see that overall we're extremely competitive with DERG B in EBRW. And you also notice that same trend of a slight dip. It's also a 2% dip for DERG B. And finally, those gray bands on the far right represent the state averages for the 3-year period. And again, for evidence-based reading and writing, there is actually a 3%, I believe it's a 3% dip for the state. So as indicated in the report, we're generally pleased with our literacy results. They are far exceeding state averages. They are very competitive with the DERG. And while we're not excited about the fact that we've got a modest dip, it's consistent across the state and across our DERG, and I think a lot of that probably can be explained by the test itself in terms of natural variation and difficulty level. To the right of that, you see our mathematics scores, and again, we're pleased to see that we have a 3-year trend. We have a slight increase. It's about a 2% increase in mathematics. You see the DERG. The DERG actually had a dip in their mathematics scores this year, as did the state. And again, we're competitive within our DERG. We're well above the state average, and our average score, which is reflected by the heights of all those bars, is above benchmark. Although we'll look at specific percentages as we move into the next section. All right, so now moving away from a graph that kind of depicted average scores, we look at this a different way with what is the actual percentage of students that are reaching benchmark. And in literacy, we're pleased this year that it's just about 80%. It was 79.4%, represented by that blue graph. That's the West Hartford performance. In orange, again, we see our DIRG, which is slightly above us. They were at 84% this year, so it's a small gap with the DIRG. And the state average, they finished off this year at 62%, down 3% from last year. Overall, that places West Hartford in the top 25% of districts for their performance on the on the school-based SAT, school day SAT, which is taken by almost 100% of our students. The only students that don't participate in the SAT as their high school assessment are students that are identified with significant cognitive impairments who take essentially an off-level test. In mathematics, we see that same trend where West Hartford, I'll call it, to be fair, I'll call it flat. We were at roughly 61% last year. We maintained at 61% this year, jumping up 5 points from the baseline year. And you see that we're able to maintain that level of performance in mathematics despite the DIRG took a big drop of 8 points. And the state itself took a modest drop down to 40%. Despite the fact that overall our math scores are slightly lower than our English language arts scores, they reflect a stronger performance statewide. We're actually in the top 20% of all school districts statewide for our performance in mathematics. And as it's cited in the report, when looking at both literacy and math, we're either the top 4 or the the 5th highest school for large schools testing more than 500 juniors. So overall, we're pleased with our general results, but there's room for us to improve. And that's always the case when we start to disaggregate our scores, specifically among state-defined groups that we look at in 2 different ways. We begin with this new category, relatively new. I believe the state's been using this for 3, maybe 4 years, called a high needs group. And the high needs group is defined as any student with disabilities, so students within our special education programming, any English language learners, and any students of socioeconomic need as identified through participation in the free and reduced lunch programs. So what you see in this graph, there's a lot of information here. The first thing I'll point out are the red bars. The red bars represent the 3-year performance of the high need subgroup at the state level, so the aggregate. And we can see that those red bars are pretty static. There's not a lot of movement there. And they reflect the fact that about 30% of students in this high needs category across the state are able to reach goal in literacy each year, only 37%. We are represented by the blue bars, which lies underneath the red, and so that you can see that we are performing better. Our students in the same category, in the high needs categories, significantly outperform students in that category at the state level. Specifically, the last 2 years, we've seen strong growth, and we land at about 53% of our students in the high needs category achieving goal at literacy. So if I could stop the sentence there, that would be a sort of good news story. But the reality is that students, that their peers that are not in the high needs, they're not students with disabilities, they're not in the English language learners, and they're not socioeconomically disadvantaged. For West Hartford over the last 3 years, basically 92% of those reach goal. Okay, 92% of their peers are able to reach goal, which leaves the gap between the high needs group and the non-high needs group, which is reflected by those numbers over on the right-hand side, which has gone from 46% 3 years ago, a 46-point gap, down to a 39-point gap. All right, so in general, the gap remained flat the last 2 years, but it moved in the correct direction from the baseline year. So significant work for us to continue to focus on those subgroups. That is our area of need, and that is why the state, I think, refers to them as a high needs group. In mathematics, it's a similar trend, but unfortunately with the higher bar, there's a lower percentage of students meeting goal in these categories, both at the state level and here in West Hartford. In fact, Across the state level, those red bars, you see that only 15% of students in the high needs group are able to meet goal across the state of Connecticut. Pleased to see that those blue bars show continued growth to start to really outstrip and nearly double in the percentage. In fact, more than double. We have 33% of our students this year in the high needs category that are reaching goal, but that's only a third. Only a third of our students combined have met goal. When we look at the numbers for their peers, it's about 75% the last 2 years, leaving a 41% gap this year you see on the right-hand side. So it's kind of very clear to us that this remains the area for consistent effort, but at the same time, pleased with the fact that we are continuing to make growth in mathematics and shrinking that gap from 50% 2 years ago with their non-high needs peers to 41% this year. Because we had historically always disaggregated our results by the state-defined categories of race, we continue to provide that information to also provide additional context and make sure that we're not losing sight of the significant work that we continue need to do in this area. We did, just because it is a single grade level and smaller numbers of students across the district, collapse students of color into a single category, certainly not to undermine the importance of race or culture of any one group, but just for efficiency of comparison. So again, there's 3 bars on these graphs. The red represents the state comparison group. So I'm defining students of color in this to be students that are Black, Hispanic, or 2 or more races as identified in their demographics reported for the SAT. And you can see the figures for the state in literacy is about 41%. It's been stable over the last 3 years in that 40 to 43% window. For West Hartford, we landed at that blue bar at 56% for our students of color achieving goal by comparison to their white peers of 91%. And each of these numbers has been fairly stable across the 3-year period. So what's reflected up here really is just the 2018 data. Underneath that is mathematics. Similar figures from the previous slide on the high needs category. 17% students for students reaching goals, students of color. West Hartford nearly double that at 31% versus their peer group at 75%. In math, interestingly, our students of color had a flat performance this year compared to last year, staying at roughly 31%, whereas the white students climbed in their performance by about 2%, actually widening that gap very slightly after closing it the previous year. So this is kind of the high level picture of where we are. Folks are reminded that there's a lot of additional information that's available to them. Not only the Board of Education report that describes the SAT at length as referenced here and in this link, but also the College Board provides information, and I would be remiss if I did not mention a support, Khan Academy, an effort, a partnership between the College Board and Khan Academy to provide free resources to all students to help improve SAT in general. Again, though, we're looking at SAT through the lens of school day as opposed to other administrations of the SAT, which a more narrow group of students take for college entrance purposes, and a very different set of results that I can speak to if you'd like more information. So with that, I'll open it up to your questions.
Thank you. I know there are a lot of questions, so who would like to start? Oh, Mark?
Thanks, Paul. You mentioned for the SAT literacy, you said top 25% in what? Where? State or?
State of Connecticut.
State of
top
Connecticut.
25%
Okay.
of all school districts.
And then when will the new math hit, or has it hit, and have we tracked that to the SAT scores? So the implementation of the new math and where it.
So I would say that it's hit in varying degrees. So the new standards in mathematics came out in 2010. So, that was 8 years ago. However, this current SAT, since 2016, part of the redesign was to align the SAT to the Common Core standards in both, and not 100% alignment, but because it was really based on the skills necessary for college, but they borrowed from the Common Core because they felt that that was the most representative body of standards, A, that's taught nationally, and B, that does prepare students. So, short answer, I would say that our students that are taking the SAT in this set have had at least 8 years. We've had those standards in place. So if we track them backward, I would say we're really starting to see some of those results of kids that have had a significant amount of time being instructed in new standards. That being said, again, our math scores are kind of outshine even though our numbers aren't the same height, they outshine. We're in the top 20% of all schools in Connecticut in terms of our performance in math.
Thanks, I have more, but I'll make sure that you guys get your stuff in, and I'll segue if I have to.
I think this is, in a way, very good news. It's great to see our students achieving so well, but of course, I'm very concerned about the achievement gap. And I'm wondering if you can just walk us through a few of the steps that are being taken to try to reduce this gap, and talk a little bit about what levels of school that happens at, and some of the methods that are being utilized.
Yeah, I think one of the most concrete examples that I could probably provide at the end of the day really gets down to placement. As we've disaggregated these scores and really backward mapped it onto courses, we need to get more of our students of color into programming, and it starts as early as elementary school, but into programming that's going to lead them into, if not honors courses, out of leveled courses, lower leveled courses at the high school. And that's really where, when we talk about achievement gap, and it goes hand in hand with opportunity gap. As I looked through some of this data and looked through those students that were below the benchmark of the 530 in mathematics, for instance, and then track that back to what courses were they in, it runs into that placement. We have to do more to get them prepared and ready so that we can get them into if not a level 2 class, what we used to call a standard level class, into a level 1 class, what we call an honors class. And so it's that opportunity gap. So it's identifying them early. It's projects that we've been involved with, such as Spark, which is intended at a very young age to identify those students of color that have been typically underrepresented in those opportunities. It's the placement programs. We had conversations with our high schools. I can think of something that happened over at Conard High School this summer, where the principal gathered around his academic team, leadership team, and said, I want you to go back into all your course recs before the start of this year, and I want you to identify 2 or 3 students specifically within our underrepresented groups to close this opportunity gap that you think that we can support by putting them into a higher level placement. And so those are some of the efforts that are underway. I came from a long meeting today, Rosina and I, and Ann and Carrie, if they're behind me, with our Professional Learning and Evaluation Committee, and we talked about systemic inequities, and it's a conversation that we had with the entire extended leadership team and saying, listen, we all know the work that we need to do. We need to start to unwrap those pieces, those parts of how we do business as a district that we maybe have done for so long that we take them for granted, and we've always been successful, but maybe we're undermining a segment of our population and not realizing it. And so what are those pieces that are systemically inequitable, creating these inequities that that perhaps we're falling victim to, hey, this is the way we've always done it, and it's kind of always given us a decent amount of success. But we can't hide from, even with the progress that we made in that one slide where it's increasing, we can't hide from the long road ahead of us in terms of the work.
Can I just piggyback on that question just briefly? I appreciate everything you're saying, but the numbers haven't moved in 3 years. So are there any things that you thought might work and then ended up not working? Or are there lessons learned about failures as much as anything else?
I'd respectfully challenge you on the numbers haven't moved. I would, this is a moving number. The increase in those blue bars for our high needs group is evidence of positive movement.
I was talking about the racial groups. I have a different question about high needs.
I didn't do the racial group with the 3-year trend, so I apologize. But you have it there.
Yeah, the reading and writing gap over 3 years.
Our reading scores are flat.
Yeah,
And
the gap is flat.
And the gap is flat with it. And that is a concern. I don't necessarily have the fast answer for you right now. I wish that I did. I think that one of the things that we've been concentrating on, we simply have to get the students into higher level courses. When we break this down based on what's an early college experience course, what's an AP course, by virtue of exposure to that curriculum, by virtue of the expectations, and the supports are there for all kids wherever they are, but it's sort of, they have to be in front of that enriched curriculum to make the difference. So we really need to push back any bias, any stereotype, and saying, well, if this student's not doing the work now, we're gonna still put them in front of that better opportunity, that bigger opportunity, provide the supports that our teachers routinely provide, and the students will rise to the challenge. It's the reason why West Hartford's being identified at the national level with AP, because we did that with AP and we opened the doors widely. We need to do that now on the basis of race and ethnicity in order to move those numbers. That's really what it is.
It's an interesting piece, if I could just jump in with one thing, because it's almost counterintuitive to say, well, kids aren't finding success, we need to challenge them more. But historically, what's happened is a child's not doing well in math, we give resource in math and take another math, and now that child is in 2 math classes, which they're not necessarily finding success with, which could drag down in other areas. And the biggest problem is it's not working. So the research is pretty clear that it used to be the idea of retake, respiral. Well, you missed something, you can't possibly go forward. That doesn't seem to be the case. So we're doing more and more with trying to push a lot in middle school, which is really a factor here that gets reflected later. But it can be counterintuitive at times.
Thank you, Paul. I would concur with Deb in terms of, I think we're doing a great job. And I do recall a few years back that you all acknowledged that you have a lot of work to do in this area, especially in the math and especially in our high needs group. But more importantly for me and our children, our students that are Black and brown, it seems to be some commonality there. I don't know if it starts in elementary school and then continues on because for some reason they don't get it, and then you're sort of stuck. So as it continues to build, you become more frustrated instead of, being introduced to some other courses. So my question is, because I know we have great staff and then we have great outside support that comes in and assist. So my question is, how can we drill down for these students? Because it just seems like there's a disconnect sometimes, and you're a great teacher, I can attest to that because my kids had you, and she was one of those kids that was just stuck and just needed that teacher to sort of be creative and really get to the heart of the matter. And then once she got it, boom, she took off. And so my question is, how can we introduce those type of either teaching methods or resources to help students sort of get over their barrier? And I know that we have Khan Academy, that's great. But even if it's great, how do we get that kid to get to Khan Academy? Because sometimes they're their worst enemy. You know, they know that these things are out there, but just to get to it, just to go to that particular website and say, okay, wow, you know, I should have done this a long time ago. How do we get them there? And how do we even involve families to get them there? So it's more than just you all doing it, but it's sort of a group effort because now we have everybody having some skin in the game.
Right. It's a great question, and B, I appreciate the connection to the real need to change, you know, mindsets even on kids, and specific to math. So the long answer is there's so much that we're doing, that we've been doing. Tom named math as an area of focus 2 years ago, and there's so much that's been happening in terms of our professional development, speakers that we're bringing in, textbook reads that have happened across schools, family math nights that have been permeating some of our elementaries, the real push with our secondary math department to get kids excited through unique offerings like exploring computer science and trying to push in some of that field to kind of get the related math piece. And we have seen it, like we've seen jumps in our math scores. I'm looking back at the numbers, and even within this group, so we had modest gains in 3 years on the SAT, and SAT is a tough measure because SAT probably is our hardest measure, our highest bar in mathematics other than AP. And we see for our, under the racial subgroups even, a modest gain from 2 years ago from the baseline. We see a larger gain in the white peer group, a 5-point gain versus a 2-point gain. So our gap actually widened, but we did better with both groups. We're just not doing better necessarily at the same rate. And it is all about, it's twofold. I think number one, it's belief in students to be able to perform in math. That's on a teacher end, that's on a student end. Math is the one area in life where people seem okay saying, I was never good at math. You would never have someone say at a party, you know, I'm not really that good at reading. Would you mind looking at this for me? People, you know, so that's a piece that we have to get over, and we have to create excitement around it. So there's been a lot of work in terms of our pedagogy. We talk about, we've had this focus of instructional practice, 8 key instructional practices that we adapted from the NCTM. And as a math teacher, I can tell you they're the instructional practices that happen with great teachers out there in social studies and in science and in language. And unfortunately, all too often, they're not employed in math. And if they could only be done so, every student would have that rich and engaging experience. I think we teach kids out of math sometimes, and I don't mean our West Hartford teachers necessarily, I mean globally. So we've done a lot of work with that. We've done a lot of work with number talks at the young level. We're bringing in 2 big name math speakers on election day this year to work with our K-5 teachers. We're sending principals and teachers out to the NCTM conference again in Hartford. So there is a dramatic amount that's being done. It's going to be a long road uphill. We'll see it when I come back and talk about, I know you're going to put me under the same fire when we talk about Smarter Balanced, when we're doing our grade 3 through 8 results. And it's interesting, there are pockets of grades where we continue, and the nice thing is, specifically in grades where we've been lagging, there are pockets of success where we've really started to see some good measurable gains. We have a long road to go. There's some stuff that we uncovered here that we're having deep conversations about in terms of just our programming. We're starting to look and peel back this onion and say, we might need to make some big systemic changes in order to address this problem, because while we're getting better in math in general, for instance, we're not closing that gap anywhere near as fast enough as we need to. And the gap lives there in English language arts as well. Interesting, I looked at a group of scores I was sharing with Carrie. I looked at a group of scores of students that had missed goal that were in this group in math in large numbers, and then flipped it to look at their literacy scores where it was a night and day comparison. So it tells me these kids can do this work. We just have to figure out how to enable that. And I think a lot of it is a K-12 look, because we teach kids out of it, and then they're not excited about it once they've struggled for too long.
Thank you. And I'm saying thank you because I appreciate your transparent report. Transparent not only in documentation, but also verbally as well. And acknowledging, yes, the highlights of the test results, but certainly acknowledging the areas of growth as well. And I very much think it's important that when we look at things from an inter-comparison, for example, comparing our test results to that of the state or that of the demographic reference group, yes, we're doing well. However, as you made note of, it also is important to recognize the intra-comparison within our school system and the areas of growth. I too share the same sentiment as my colleagues of being concerned about the achievement gap. However, I very much appreciate the fact that you and others are supporting us keep moving forward in addressing that. And you just made reference to it's not about they can't learn, but acknowledging how they can learn and to work them with. I'm not paraphrasing your words well, but essentially that's what you described. And that's important because we know, especially when it comes to standardized testing historically, and many times they're not always that culturally relevant in terms of the questions or how they are phrased. So when you have persons of different backgrounds that are responding to those questions, that may impact their results as well. And this goes back to when the very first standardized testing came to be in the early 1900s. So I think it's important to continue to try to think outside of the box, is what you're describing, and trying to see how to improve our students' test scores. And we know that we have many young people that have a lot of crystallized intelligence in terms of their schooling and learning, but we also know there's fluid intelligence as well, and there's some kids that would do really well with that. Unfortunately, we don't have standardized testings that assess their fluid intelligence, but I'm sure many young people would score off the charts with that. So thank you for your transparency. Thank you for not giving up. And you made reference to we're going uphill. If I may refer to it as we're a salmon swimming upstream, but that salmon is going to keep on moving along. So thank you for keep on moving along.
So as a continuous improvement model, as we are in West Hartford, and I think we all take that seriously, and we really look for those incremental changes. And every time we see them, we grab onto them. Maybe a little down, a little up, but we're always continuous improvement. We're changing the way we do things in order to make sure that our students are achieving the best possible test scores, and not even test scores, but just in learning in general. But, and I said this before, and I'll use myself as an example, as my own achievement gap. I will never be, I will have a huge achievement gap in math between you and myself, Paul. I just never, and in English too, and in history, I'll never be, I'll have that achievement gap in history. At what point, and I used that example before because we need to know it as a board, is, like unemployment at 4.5%, they say there is zero unemployment. It's transition. What achievement gap, I have one myself, is that we know that, because we're making increment changes, you're changing the way we do things. How far do we have to go? Because we'll never close it 100%, right? I'm assuming, because no one learns at the same levels. So at what point do we know that, wow, so if we make incremental different changes and we leaped by 5%, and we've only, where does it, again, under the continuous improvement model, because we always want to go better and better every year after year, but where, and at all levels, regardless of race, where does that?
Sure. So what I would probably look at to answer that question is the state takes the SAT tests. College Board says, hey, 480, 530, those are your benchmark. So the state adopted those as the goal figures. The state then, because it's a state test, not just the SAT, they broke it into 4 performance categories. And to my recollection, they took the cut score for. Give me one moment. I'm sorry. Here we go. They took the cut score of, in English language arts, of getting a 630. If you get a 630 on the evidence-based reading and writing, and this isn't in your report, or if you get a 650 in math, then you're in the top 20% of test takers nationwide. And so they called that the exceeded category. And they took the lower bound of a 410 on English and a 410 on math, and that was the lowest 10% of test takers nationwide. They called that the level 1. So they have that level 1, 2, 3, 4. And my simple answer to the question would be, when our percentages, when our students are able to fall into those categories, into those percentages, regardless of race or ethnicity or socioeconomic status or students with disability status, then we know that we will have achieved some form of an equilibrium. But if we're getting more students, more white students in exceeded, significantly more than 20% into exceeded, and not getting 20%, whether it's Hispanic, Black, or what have you, into that same band, then there's some form of a bias, whether it's a test bias, whether it's an opportunity bias because we haven't exposed kids to the curriculum, or whether it's some instructional bias that I'm certain that we're not intentionally aware of, but somehow creating that with students, that because intelligence and achievement, if these achievement tests are actually good measures of understanding of curriculum, shouldn't have a gap that's based on race, ethnicity, or socioeconomics. It's really, I think if we can put students in front of the material and provide them high quality instruction that differentiates to their needs, they will demonstrate achievement.
So the difference between, I guess, the exceed and the lowest, if you took the two averages and came up with a middle, that's what you're calling a mean? No? Okay, because you said 630 and 410.
So when you think of your SAT score, from 0 to 800, and the average score that you get. So when you and I took the SAT back in the day, and you got a whatever. Those numbers, those raw score numbers, are what the state uses to break it into 4 categories, and those numbers are based on the distribution of scores as the College Board tracks nationally. So anyone who achieves in the top 20% is considered a 4, and the cut score for that is a 630 in math, or a 630 in literacy and a 650 in math.
I guess what I'm getting at is, to close the achievement gap, because that's essentially what we want to do, is to identify, like you said, maybe you don't know.
Here's a better way I might explain it. Rather than achievement, I'll explain it with opportunity. Let's say that 32% of the West Hartford population are students of color, and I'm sure that number is not accurate, but then I should have 32% students of color in my AP classes. I should have 32% students of color in my honors classes. And so once we can achieve that, I think the achievement gap will take care of itself.
Okay, so I wasn't thinking that. All right, that makes sense to me. Definitely.
And that's, and I really appreciate your comments, Lorna, because the one thing that as a leader I tell everybody is we cannot be defensive. It just gets us nowhere with kids because we know all the reasons, all the thoughts. Now, if I step back in a sociological piece and I talk about America, it's just a simple fact. Our Black and our Hispanic students tend to be our most transient students, so they're not the students that have been here K through 12, which is a factor. When we talk about opportunity, You talk about American poverty and how that affects these, and you're talking about opportunity. We're digging to find everything we can and trying to do it in a way that's not, I'm blaming either the child or the teacher or the parent or the society. This is what is. And Paul's answer to your question, Mark, it's a good question. That's the right answer. You know, what percentage should it be? It's whatever percentage we have, that's how it should look throughout. Because if we close our own systemic opportunities, which means convincing, because there used to be, we've done a pretty good job of tearing down a lot of the obvious barriers. You know, the gatekeeping. Well, you got to see, you can't possibly take that. That's pretty much fallen away. At least we keep hammering it. But so now it's that kind of enticement opportunity where who's begging you, who's convincing you, who's doing the work to say you can really do this. So I do appreciate the question, and I appreciate that answer too.
And if I may, and if I go back to my foundations, because you know, building as the teachers do, as I used as an analysis, is that, I guess, to wrap that up, is that, do we need more resources, right, for math and reading at a younger age, at a lower grade, to help close that achievement gap and identify it earlier, right? Because I guess, you know, with all the numbers that we have now, you can kind of drill down and do the statistical and find that, you know, maybe we could put more resources in third grade, second grade. You know, I don't know that answer. I'm just talking out loud. So that, you know, you see dividends, and I always go back to that seventh grade score that we had that had a large dip. We identified it, we went in, we corrected it. That was 4 years ago, and we saw it come back up. Same kind of thing. Is, I guess, can we drill down? And, you know, we always come to budget where, you know, we're talking about cutting this, cutting that, but you never heard me talk about cutting any resource that would help even the one child, the 10 children that can close that achievement gap. I mean, there's probably not a very simple answer. I don't know the answer, but we have the numbers, we have the statistics, we have a math guru here that could drill down and do those stats and come up with, you know, a solution, I guess. And it's not a one-year solution, it's a evolution. So I guess what I was really trying to get at is, do we have enough information here to apply different resources, which I know you do because continuous improvement, we're always moving, but if we need additional resources and things like that, that's all. I guess that's what I'm getting at.
I mean, the short answer is we're working at that every day. That was really a big part of our first day of leadership back with principals. We asked them to come in and we asked them to present to us their problem of practice that existed in their data and demonstrate, you know, the depth to which they dug in and found tangible action steps in response to observed patterns, something that could be actionable, and what they were going to do with it and how they're going to work on it throughout the course of the year. So, you know, that's what we're trying.
If I could take an example from that, because it does get to date. At a couple of schools, they looked at one, and Paul will probably talk more about this when we get to the Smarter Balance, because it was more of an elementary. But we're using a measure throughout the year, expecting that will be reflected. And a couple people are questioning, well, that wasn't the marker we thought it would be. That's been kind of our assumption, but the more we fine tune it, the more we dig deep, it may not be the same marker for everybody that it has been. So we'll talk more about that, but that's really so the thing now, you're right, we have a lot of data, huge amounts of data, and everybody works with it differently. Paul's unbelievable with his pivot tables and everything else. I tend to dive in by hand. I just remember it better that way when I go through things that way. But But we're also trying to teach all of our leaders, really, those questions you're asking, are they asking the same questions when they're looking at the data? And then how do we transform that to our teachers looking at the data in the same way? The reports you'd get, not you, but the West Hartford Board of Education would get 15 years ago, it's kind of fascinating because, and this isn't a critique of 15 years ago, 20 years ago, it's just the way things were done, the teachers weren't having the same conversations that were happening here. And I do think that is a noticeable shift as far as when we talk about systemic inequities and what are we doing, that we're having that conversation vertically, not just separate levels. So,
And as we're talking, so say the elementary school testing, right? And we all get that with the bar across,
Yep.
and we compare ourselves to Connecticut and the highest, and and I forgot the exact scoring. I'll use 410 for argument's sake. If we see, was it fourth graders take it, third graders? Third graders. If we see a 410, the lowest is in 5% of those kids, whatever that number may be. I'm making them up just for illustration purposes. Can we put together, and we probably do this, and you're going to say, hey, Mark, well, we've been doing that for years. But, so the kid, there's 5-7% that get the 410, the lowest grade, and you develop kind of an additional helping, in a tutoring scenario. And so, there's probably the answer. You're shaking your head. All right. That's like a simple one, right? Yeah, we do that, right? Okay.
If I can segue from that one briefly to go back to the high needs question, not the racial one, but the high needs categories. Could you disaggregate those groups a bit? Because in keeping with this, how can we tell about everybody? If someone whose English is not very good does less well, I'm less concerned about that than I am if it's poverty that is explaining why they can't do well, as opposed to a disability, whatever. And so I understand that you're not lumping them together, the state's lumping them together, but how do we can't address the issues if we don't know where the problems are. So I wonder if you, in all your masses of data, you have some sense of those distinctions.
yeah, I've got it first. And then jump in. The good thing is we get these scores by student. So we never just think of this as, we present here on the macro level, but we're really talking about that child. And so, to your point, when a child comes here, if they moved in a week before the test and they speak no English, they still have to take this assessment. So, and I'll let you talk about the other piece.
Absolutely. An English language learner, and as we're talking about a high school assessment, is very appropriate, because if you're still in the English language learner program in high school, that either means you're a new arrival, relatively new, last 5 years, or you've never been able to pass that English language proficiency test since whenever you started taking it, which may have been as early as kindergarten, which really is not the norm. So your point's very well taken. An English language learner in high school, that's a very high bar for them to be able to reach the college and career ready benchmark on the SAT. The short answer is not only can we look at them individually, and even the public can disaggregate on the public website, which is listed in the report, edsite.ct.gov, I believe, can disaggregate at least students with disabilities and English language learners. A lot of the economically disadvantaged data is really suppressed, and it's even suppressed for me. Like, I can't look up, in my capacity as assistant superintendent, I have no access to students that are participating in our free and reduced lunch programs. That being said, as Tom said, we do have the ability, and we look at each student individually and make sure that we can program for them for their individual needs. But we do use that data as when Gretchen and I are talking about and we've had this conversation, what should be an appropriate goal in a student's IEP relative to whatever their current levels of performance are? And that's some of the differences, because students with disability is this mile-wide, very broad label that we put on children. And I can be on this end of the spectrum with that and have very significant intensive academic needs, or really I could just have some issues that maybe are more of a behavioral nature, and my academics are not a problem whatsoever. So that really, a lot of that gets taken care of when you're individualizing for the student in their IEP, and you're looking at their current levels of performance, and you're setting a rigorous goal for them. And again, similarly with English language learners, we're really always looking at some of the language proficiency first, and that's typically spoken is the most important, followed quickly by reading, and then working on writing and listening along the way.
If I could ask a slightly more confrontational question. The numbers that you've presented are 2016, 2017, 2018. Those are 3 different sets of students. Have you ever looked at the data cohort by cohort? And do you see, if so, do you see that there are improvements over time with that cohort, or are we simply taking kids who are reasonably smart and they continue to be reasonably smart, and kids who are challenged and they continue to be challenged? Do you see what I mean? How much value added are we doing?
So our ability to do that, it's something that we do always do, but we've had challenges tracking that back to different state assessments over time for a number of reasons. Hey, the SAT changed, and there's not really this comparison from the old SAT to the new SAT. And even if there were, the old SAT was this elective test that you could take. And anticipating that question, I looked quickly. 97% of kids over 6 different iterations just last year that took the elective SAT as juniors, not even counting our seniors. 97% passed the evidence-based reading and writing. 87% passed the mathematics. Much higher numbers. The school day SAT is like 100% of students will take it, whether you're thinking at that time about college or not, whether you're a student, an English language learner, as Tom said, that just arrived, or what have you. So we only can go back 3 years on that data. But we do match it to, we've been doing the PSAT in grade 9 and in grade 10 for every student, and then as an elective in grade 11, students can elect to participate in that. And that was one of the examples I think I mentioned in the report in terms of, I can't remember the exact specific, but it was through the cohort analysis that we saw the numbers that we got were not a surprise. We saw that kind of coming. What we're hoping for soon, as we get a little bit mature in our cohorts, is to be able to then map that back to some of our Smarter Balance. Our Smarter Balance really data only goes back 4 years, and even when that came in, they then, after 1 year, they took away the writing component and totally changed and kind of invalidated 1 whole year's worth of scores for comparative purposes. So that's the piece as these cohorts mature that we'll do to be able to demonstrate that, and that will become a feature of our reports once we can map it backward to connect to those data sets.
It's one of those things, I'm glad Paul mentioned it with the number of test takers. I just pulled it out. One of the worst articles you'll ever find, and they post it every year, is what state's the smartest state? And Minnesota's always named as the smartest state. And I take no offense to Minnesotans, and I apologize for this, but they base it on SAT scores from that state. Minnesota has a total of 2,061 students take the SATs last year. It's not an SAT state, it's an ACT state, where more of the students take the ACT, but beyond that, it's a subset. It's not everybody, and so that's why national comparisons become difficult, because now you're seeing more. Actually, in New England now, it's Maine, New Hampshire, Connecticut, all giving school day SAT, Rhode Island moving in, So now you're getting more comparisons about how Connecticut's doing, but when it's used to skew, and so that's the difficulty with comparing which iteration. I will say, to jump on what Paul said, the fact that now, and that's one of the decisions the board made and supported, was it used to be you take the PSAT, that was it, and now it's 9th grade PSAT, 10th grade PSAT, 11th grade PSAT, and SAT. But the board supports 9th and 10th, and then the state supports the 11th grade, paying for all students' tickets. So we can track that student, we can track their growth. And this is really where the Khan Academy piece that you talked about comes in, which is why we're trying so hard for linkage, because it will automatically link my 9th grade performance on the 9th grade PSAT, which the PSAT reports are the best score reports in the business because they identify by question, by stretch area, and we can share those with you because they're stunningly good. They're what teachers should use to look at, okay, what didn't you do well in? And so by linking it, I'm not taking just a random Khan Academy work. It's focused on what I didn't do well on. And so in time, we see that growth. Once again, the commercial for it, 20 hours equals 150 points growth. And the fascinating thing about it is that's the same for every demographic. That's basically what it leads to. So that's the importance of the 9th and 10th grade, to do exactly what you're saying, because you're right. There are some years where, as a principal, you have a class coming in, you go into the test knowing, oh, we're going to have a dip this year. Just last year's class was an exceptionally strong class. This year's class isn't as strong. It's going to look like a dip. The instruction might have been better, but I'm comparing apples and oranges. So, yeah.
Following along on that, the hope, or one of the hopes of instituting the school day SAT was that some students might actually apply to college who might not otherwise have applied to college. We now have 3 years of information. Have we seen, I mean, I don't even know if you have access, but have we seen any change in
I actually
students?
just got a national report on that. Two things combined there. One is statewide SAT has absolutely led to an increase in applications from those states, okay? Part two is unlimited score sends, unlimited free score sends for economically disadvantaged. Because the idea is the more plays you apply to, the more opportunity you have. That's also tied into, so to disaggregate, the fact that the Common App now is so common, where I'm not doing 8 necessarily, I'm kind of, well, I've already done it, I might as well send it here. That has been one of the true huge successes of statewide SATs, is it has led definitively to economically disadvantaged students to applying to more schools, to black students applying to more schools, Hispanic students applying to more schools. I can't tell you yet the exact results in West Hartford for it because we had a pretty high number, but our total number of applications were up last year. So I'll do more of that digging in the coming weeks also.
I just have one structural request. I totally appreciate the cost savings of getting us black and white instead of color printouts, but since we have black and white, if you could like change the shapes or something, because there was no way to tell what
I didn't realize you guys got black and white. I would make sure you'll get color next time because graphs are meaningless without color.
And it's fine to do it black and white, but then we just need a different shape or something.
That was Deb's suggestion, right?
And finally, can I just ask a completely ignorant question? If these are graduation exams, in a way, what happens if you don't hit benchmark?
That's an excellent question. So Ann and I are working with a number of, with our content area supervisors and other building administrators to talk about that, because there is this exciting law in the books that says students will pass a performance examination for which the state assessment could be counted. And so when we shifted away from CAPT to the SAT, it is in fact the SAT that represents that performance exam. Even though there are plenty of good applied questions, I think it's a very different test from the CAP. So we spent the last 2 years with our graduation committee kind of redigging into that and saying, okay, what are we going to use for measures on the SAT if for any reason we would be different from goal, and goal is our number one. How will we backward map that? And when they don't make that, what are our other options? So certainly we talk about looking at AP exams as application of knowledge. We were comfortable with that across the disciplines. We looked at analogous scores on the ACT. ACT is a very different test from the SAT. It's very much about application of skills and context. And then we have our district-based assessments, and it was in some areas, specifically in science, where we have the next generation science standard, we have some evolution to those district assessments that we're in the process of working on to get a newer version of them to align more closely to the new standards in science. And that'll be work over the next year and a half, because the new science assessment was only in its pilot year, and it will be in its formal official year this year for the first time.
Well, we've pretty much torn your ear off, but are there other questions before? Go for it.
Thank you very much. I think you're hearing a lot of commitment among the board members to try to help reduce this achievement gap. And I'm hopeful that this is a conversation we can continue throughout this year. And I think my specific request is, when it comes time to talking about the budget, I've heard you talk a lot about bringing in experts, about professional development, about curriculum. I think it would be helpful for us to know this spring which budget items are tied to the items that we've talked about tonight, so that we can make that connection to which line items are associated with this goal of ours, which is really to help support the efforts of the administration, of the teachers in our school system to improve performance among all subgroups and reduce the achievement gap. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
Other? Thank you. Okay, and I assume Mr. Vicinis will yield his seat to the personnel report and Mr. Rick Ledwith.
I think I'll sit in this seat. Hello again. Personnel report is on page 10 and 11. And this is our second personnel report of the year. And it's really a supplement to the opening report that we had last month. And the reason I phrase it that way is, if you notice, we've hired 9 teachers on the left-hand part of the report, and we only have 2 resignations and 1 retirement. And as I mentioned in our report last month, we had a lot of late retirements and a few resignations as well late in the summer that we usually don't get that late. And these folks are the teachers that we've hired to succeed those folks who were reflected in last month's report. And you also notice that we do have that 1 retirement. That individual did retire on September 15th. He let us know last spring he was retiring. So we actually hired his successor over the summer, and that person was ready to start the year. And we used this individual to supplement someone who was out on a leave to start the year. So it was a seamless transition for the kids. So no issues from that perspective. So not much to it this month. I'd be happy to answer any questions that the board had.
Questions? I think we all have laryngitis from the last
I
one.
know.
So, sorry?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, now we go to the financial report. I guess I never remember the order. We make the motion first, then we have the report, and then we vote on it, right? So may I have a motion that the Board of Education approve the financial report for the period ending June 30th, 2018.
So moved.
Second? Okay, report.
That's me. I'm up for this time, so thank you. Coming around now for the board is the budget with the numbers for the different categories. This should have been in the binder that we all received. Thank you, Chip, for making sure that everybody had that for us. And the report I'm going to give, I would like to dedicate to Chip Ward and the hard work that you put in, and not just you, but your staff, and not just you and your staff, but the principals throughout the district, the teachers and the schools. Everybody worked together to get this result that we've got, and that can't be pointed out enough. We really, the highlight of this, the headline, is a first line we see in the general fund. Now, I just want to state, though, that this report is for the financial period that ended June 30th of last year. And the headline is, the general fund ended with a surplus of $1,051,447, which was returned to the town. Now, that number was 0.66%, and it's less than 1% of the budget. We were on target, and that doesn't happen, except, you know, in my business, it doesn't happen. So kudos to everyone. Thank you so much. And I know that there were some twists and turns to get there, but to be able to give money back to the town is really something else. After all of the budget struggles we had, and there was some back and forth as far as the budget, but we gave money back. Great work. Let's go into some details on how that happened here. Look at the salaries. We ended with a positive balance of $1,134,117 in the combined salary accounts compared to our budget. Saw positive variances in teachers' salaries, reflecting fewer teachers employed for the year than were budgeted, and more retirements at the end of the 16-17 school year than we had expected, and we didn't fill these positions. So we saved money there. Again, kudos to everybody for the work they did. Much appreciated there. We had surpluses in non-teaching positions, reflecting lower filled staffing in these areas. We saw a deficit in teacher substitutes offset by a surplus in teacher assistants. Payments for unused sick leave at retirement were higher than the budget due to a large number of non-certified staff who retired in June of 2018. If we go a little further down to the benefits section, that's 5201 to 5209, we ended with a positive balance of $159,000, lower unemployment compensation costs, and lower Social Security payments associated with lower payroll expenses were the primary drivers there. Continuing to purchase services, that's 5311 to 5490. Overall, we saw a deficit here, $169,000 in the purchase services accounts. We saw a large deficit in contracted services, but check this. This was due to the move from 11 Wampanoag to the Cogswell building and numerous mechanical issues at schools that required outside contractors to address. So this is kind of a one-off kind of thing. If we hadn't made that move, we wouldn't have seen it so much, but the move is just an outstanding thing that we have done, and well worth the small expense there in comparison to the larger budget as a whole. We had surpluses in professional technical services, pupil transportation, and tuition to offset much of the deficit in these accounts. Moving down to supplies, materials, and capital outlay. We saw roughly a $72,000 deficit in these accounts, and there were variances from budget in these accounts that pretty much balanced each other out. We did spend more than budgeted on computer equipment as we continue to refresh our technology infrastructure. If we go on to the next page about grant funds. Now, you remember this is one where we do our work to spend all the money we've got. Or that we ended the year with $504,126 in balances in state and federal grants. We had positive balance in IDEA and Title I public funds, but all fiscal year 18 grant balances will roll over, and we have until June 30th of 2019 to use them up. There's approximately $1,500 in unused fiscal year private school grant balances, which will be returned to the state. And that's not us, it's our private schools that didn't have the opportunity or weren't able to make that, spend that last small amount there. Moving to special funds. Special funds ended the year with a total balance of $1,329,158, which is a decrease of $158,967 for the 2017 to 18 fiscal year. Continuing education program lost $22,576 for the year. We've discussed that, how that's been happening. It's a trend we're seeing. The 9 to 12 summer school in the summer of 2017 had a shortfall of $94,000 due to declining enrollment. Tuition revenue accounts saw decreases in its balances as we had more expenses charged to this account. Interest rates rebounded, and interest on investments account saw some revenue this year. Overall, special funds remain appropriately funded to meet the unique needs that they serve. And finally, what we always look forward to, because I get hungry about this time in our report anyway, is nutrition services. And this is good news here. Nutrition Services Department ended the fiscal year with an operating surplus of $23,633. Student lunch count did drop by 5.2%. Sales increased by 0.4%, because you might remember we increased the price of lunch by 25% last year. And that offset, 25 cents, thank you, yes, I stand corrected, all right. 25 cents last year. Yeah, definitely worth it. And that small increase actually helped with a decrease in sales. And then the price remained same this school year that we've begun now. The price remained the same as last year. Overall expenses increased only slightly, 0.7%, as lower food purchases reflecting both efficiencies and lower meal counts offset higher wages and benefits. And I want to point out here, kudos to Tim Przinski and his team for their efforts in streamlining things and making better purchases with less money. So kudos to them all, and nutrition services folks, keep up the good work there. We continue to look at ways to increase meal counts and reduce food count and labor costs. And that ends my official presentation. Are there any questions we'd like to discuss with Chip?
Thanks, Dave. Chip, correct me if I'm wrong, you've mentioned in past meetings that generally there's a surplus every year that the school board returns to the town, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So the amount that's being returned this year, how does that rate in recent years as far as, is that significantly more? Is it kind of in line with where
It's
we've
about
been?
kind of in line. Typically, we average around 0.5%, so at 0.66, it's a little bit above.
Okay. I just had a couple questions about a couple of things that might seem small, but under special funds, there was a decrease of almost 159,000 in the past fiscal year. Can you explain what caused that decrease?
So the special funds comprise a whole group of funds, different programs that are education related. We've got continuing education, we've got instrument rental, we've got tuition revenue, which is where we charge students, primarily special education costs for students who come to West Hartford from other districts, and we bill them back for those special education costs. Miscellaneous rentals are when we rent out the auditoriums and gyms for a variety of activities in the WE program spaces. Preschool is our preschool programs, both the ELC and the Charter Oak, Smith, and Webster Hill program. And then interest on investment is just, we earn interest on the balance of those funds. So we have about a net change of $158,000 in the negative for the year as a result of the changes that you see there. The biggest decrease is in preschool account tuition, a decrease of $146,000. And that just reflects the fact that the tuition that we're allowed to charge doesn't cover the entire cost of the program. So there's an imbalance there. At some point, we're going to probably bring more of those costs back into the general fund, and that will reduce the impact on the special funds. But basically, we charge the costs of the teachers and the paraprofessionals, their salaries. but we used to have a higher maximum tuition cost, but now it's, the state limits what we can charge to $3,800, about $4,000. We used to charge up to $8,000 for some full pay.
Okay, great. And then regarding the shortfall of 94,000 for summer school,
Yep.
do you think that's tied, because didn't we shorten that this past year as far as?
This is the paid summer school at the high school.
Mhm.
Sorry, I've gotten some feedback here. So that's the paid summer school. So this was the summer of 2017, which was, so it's not the most current summer, it's the previous summer. And so this is where students take both for-credit and credit skip ahead and then credit recovery courses during the summer. And so we have been seeing, this is where we used to be the only game in town for that. And so people from many, many towns would come to see us, and now other towns are building their own programs, so we don't have quite as many. So we're running at a slight loss. However, compared to the cost of providing those courses during the regular school year, it would be substantially more than that in terms of the number of FTEs that we save, so.
It's an interesting question. I'm glad you brought it up, Rob, because we have historically looked at summer school as if, well, we lost money on summer school, we're losing money on summer school. We don't say during the course of the school year, we're losing money on school. I mean, we kind of are, but it's because of the function of where it falls in this report, because it used to be expanded, we used to take in tuition, and now summer school is far more for West Hartford students. And so it's kind of a different mindset of how we look at it now.
Yeah, the cut, I think your question about whether this is what we cut on the the early education, the special education. Remember, we cut it from 5 days to 4 days.
Special education was 30 days, and it was in the summer of 16. In the summer of 17, it was dropped to 24 days.
Other questions? I actually also wondered about the summer school program. Are there ways to narrow the gap between what we bring in and what it costs us, or is that just what it is?
If you think about it, we have 642 students this summer taking a course each. And we lost $94,000 total. If we had 642 students taking a course each at the high school, with what it costs for one teacher being $70,000 for the year, this is still
Benefits closer to 94,000.
with benefits, yeah, basically 94,000, and the number of teachers we'd have to hire to meet that. This is actually, summer school is still one of the biggest bargains we get. It's just kind of how we look at it.
And in addition to sort of the financial aspect, there's the aspect of serving the students. I mean, this allows students so they don't have to take an extra course, they can catch up over the summer, they can get ahead over the summer. So it provides an opportunity for students. So even if there wasn't a financial, it's something the board would have to think about whether you wanted to address that. But each year we try to be more careful in terms of how many low enrollment courses we cut. Rosina and I have lots of interesting discussions about those things. But at the same time, we're also recognizing that this is a valuable service both financially to the board and then more importantly for the students in terms of giving them those opportunities.
Thank you. Other questions? Are we ready to vote? Okay. All in favor of the Board of Education approving the financial report for the period ending June 30th, 2018, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Another unanimous vote. Hoping to continue on this trend of unanimity, thank you very much. I would like to call for motion that we approve the minutes of the regular Board of Education meeting of September 4th, 2018.
So moved. Second.
I'll take one as a second. Any changes or comments? Ready to vote? Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes? Aye. Opposed? Okay. Board Information and reports, starting with board members' communications and reports. Go ahead.
So the only thing that I want to report out in terms of the CREC Council, I had talked about this, I want to say late in our year, last year, was that CREC is just very concerned about the growing expenses that CREC has to take on since the state is slow in paying their expenses. And one of the ways that CREC is looking to address this is to put together a subcommittee to come up with some type of resolution, because what their fear is, if it continues to go in this direction, then towns are going to have to begin to absorb some of that cost. And of course, we don't want that. So I will keep you posted as CREC forges ahead, and Tom may want to weigh in on this as well.
I do. Not to be controversial or anything, and our friends from CREC, I get along with them. We're more efficient than CREC. If there are certain things CREC, I'll make one statement and then I'll end. We don't have any assistant principals at our elementary schools.
Well, moving right along to other board reports. Any reports from other board members, please?
Okay, I just want to take a moment to thank our schools for their hospitality. One of the things I enjoy about being on the Board of Ed is being able to visit our different schools, the schools that I'm not necessarily familiar with because maybe my children didn't go there. And everybody's just been so welcoming. So it's been a month since we last met. And I was able to go in the time between our last meeting. I visited Wolcott thanks to Principal Scott Dunn, and I visited their curriculum night. And it's just always neat to be reminded how that goes. And I sat in on kindergarten teacher Emily Thurston's presentation to the parents with kindergartners. And my kids are in high school, so I've forgotten about this, you know, and if you can remember what it's like when you first let your kid go to school. And Ms. Thurston is just a great example of the quality teachers we have throughout the district. I want to thank her as well for allowing me to sit in. And then Duffy, I'd like to thank them for allowing me to gain some weight. I went to their ice cream social and got a chance to practice my Japanese skills. I left Japan 22 years ago, but we've got a couple families from Japan. So that was fun. And then I got to go to Charter Oak's Peace Day celebration. And one of the neat things, that's a great celebration, but just one small example of how neat it was. The crowd was so big that Lorna was there, and I didn't see her, and she didn't see me because there were too many people there. So that was neat. I really enjoyed being part of that. And as a neighbor as well, it's really neat to see all the pinwheels out in the schoolyard that the children worked so hard on. They created and they placed them throughout the school grounds. And then Conard had an open house. Now my children go there, so I usually don't talk about that. But during my son's lunch period, I took a chance to visit the auto tech class. And Chaz McDermott there, and heard from the parents just expressing to the teacher there their thanks for having the opportunity for auto tech. We talked about SAT tonight, and we've talked about it on the board here, but you know, that their kids may not be interested in college so much. And I know how they feel because remember I had 3 years of auto shop back in high school and then joined the Army as a mechanic, and some kids at Conard and their parents really appreciated the opportunities for what we offer in tech ed. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to share that last week I had the pleasure of participating in, and there were many persons from administration and teachers as well, in the Witness Stones first installation ceremony. This is something that took place on Wednesday. And the Witness Stones project is something that originally was started in Guilford, Connecticut, as an attempt to recognize those persons enslaved there who were not recognized, either via documentation or anything of that sort, apart from being recognized as a piece of property. And so fortunately, to two of our leaders here in town, Tracy Wilson, our town historian, and also Liz Devine, they've taken it upon themselves to bring that project here. We are the second town in Connecticut to take on this project. And under the wonderful leadership of Sean O'Connor, the USA AP history teacher at Conard, he and his students have done wonderful research in acknowledging two slaves who were owned here in town. Jude and George, they were the property of the Sedgwick family and the Goodwin family. And last week, Wednesday, they were recognized, and formally a stone was marked for them and placed in the cemetery temporarily, and formally a stone marker will go where they resided. This here is the program that was passed out to all those who attended the ceremony. And it's a wonderful way of acknowledging how our town does recognize the good that we have. We certainly have a lot of history, but again, in being transparent, it acknowledges the part of our history that we may not speak about, and certainly recognizes the contributions that African Americans have made to this town for centuries, and we continue to make to this town. So Jude and George were the first individuals to be recognized, and the class now is going to embark on researching 2 additional families and residents as well. So thank you very much for supporting this, Tom. And Rosina, thank you very much. And the administration and teachers, thank you for, again, encouraging our young people to be open-minded in recognizing the history of West Hartford.
Thank you, Lorna, for speaking at the event and representing the whole board. Please.
So, thanks for mentioning that. My son attended, who's in 8th grade at KP, and I take him to physical therapy right across from the cemetery. And he gave me, like a 10-minute dissertation on exactly what happened, how it happened, and I was so impressed. It felt like I actually was there. I apologize for missing it, but he was very impressed with the whole ceremony. And this is an 8th grade boy, and he was just overwhelmed. He's like, "Dad, you really missed something cool." So thanks for doing that. I also attended the KP curriculum night. And I was trying to do the math in my head, I think 6 years ago for my oldest, I think. And it has, and I had my reservations, even 5 years ago when I was on the board, I had my reservations about curriculum night at KP because it was overwhelming. And I think they did all the grades at once or something, and I was not happy as a dad. And I happen to be on the board of ed too. And I know, and I got to tell you, it was a very different environment there. It was well done. The kids, it was night and day and I want to thank the administration and everyone at KP for making a successful night under that whole continuous improvement model. And, oh well, age got to me. My third statement's out.
While you're gathering your thoughts, any other reports we can give? I knew it. Go for it.
Age is only a number. I really, and I wanted to say this early when they first came here. For the American Legion, I've been kind of closely working with them in the past, and I am a member of the American Legion. These guys do yeoman's work, and they really support the community. And everyone thinks the American Legion is a smoky bar. And it's not here in West Hartford anymore. Even when they did have the facility, it was like walking into a Fridays. It was one of the best facilities ever. But because of their vision and their mission, they no longer even have a bar. You know what they do? Because they thought, and I because I'm a veteran, I was able to see these emails and such. But what they do is they say, what is our real service here? It's about serving the community, and for 96 years they've been doing that here, taking care of veterans, mentoring youth, promoting patriotism, all that, and they do it without that that smoky bar that everyone thinks they did, because they rented that out and they says this is why we're here. These guys and those 3 individuals. They put a lot of time into this community and do wonderful things, and even for us in West Hartford, when we honor the graduates that are attending military service. I had to, congratulate them and give them kudos. And I meant to do it earlier, and I apologize, I forgot, but thanks.
Thank you for that. Okay, then moving to the highlight of our evening, the report from student board representatives.
Okay, so to start off, everyone has really been getting settled pretty well for the school year. The freshmen are integrating into the school environment really well. Thanks to the effort of the Link crew, which I mentioned last time, and a thing that we do called Freshman Seminar, where members of the Link crew and guidance staff will go to the freshman study halls and basically tell the freshmen what they're going to have to do to be successful in high school. Things like studying habits that they should try to develop, and like how to go see a teacher for extra help, things like that. The sports seasons are also going pretty well. A lot of the Conard Hall games are happening this week and next week. Also, it was already mentioned, the open house was last week. All the parents got to go from class to class, meet all of their sons and daughters' teachers, learn about the curriculum for the year, and basically learn more about the school environment that the students are seeing every day. The Connecticut Children's Medical Center, we're doing a toy drive for that. That wraps up later this month. Also, we didn't mention this last time. The Conard parking lot was also redone over the summer. The traffic pattern is slightly different. People seem to agree that it makes things a lot smoother and safer. And I'm not going to bore you guys by talking more about the SAT, but the freshmen, sophomores, and juniors are taking the PSAT, which was already mentioned, and during that time, the seniors are going to be able to get help with college applications while the other students are testing. And that's about it.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. We are 1 month into the school year, and Hall High School is already in the full swing of things. Curriculum night was last week, and there was a huge turnout of parents eager to go back to the place they missed the most, high school. There were engaging displays of art, science, music, and parents had the opportunity to meet with teachers, other students, and administrators. As Gus mentioned, PSAT testing for freshmen, sophomores, and juniors who register will be held next week on Wednesday, October 10th. Instead of being a short day per usual, it will be a full day. Students are thrilled about that. And seniors have the opportunity to come in early for the Common App workshop with the guidance counselors, which is a great opportunity for anyone who needs a little extra help as we approach the early action and early decision deadlines of November 1st. Athletics at Hall are going wonderfully. Last night was our Hall Conard soccer game, Hall won, and our teams are working hard and having fun. My personal team, field hockey, is currently undefeated 6-0, but we'll knock on wood. The Black Box Theater will put on its first production of the year, A Wrinkle in Time, next Wednesday through Saturday. Tickets are $10 for adults and $5 for students, and it is sure to be a wonderful performance with a very talented cast, so we hope to see some of you there. And our student government is beginning a voter registration drive starting next week, which is very exciting. We're going to be putting members of student government in direct contact with every eligible voter in the school, and they're going to reach out, email, introduce themselves, provide them with the materials they need, and say, like, can we meet during a free period to walk them through the process instead of doing targeting the whole school. We figured we'd go the individual approach. So we're looking forward to that. And everyone is looking forward to the busy but exciting weeks ahead. Thank you very much.
She won't mention it herself. Megan was featured nationally in a video for Teen Vogue about the Supreme Court hearings and the opinions of America's youth, and she was one of the people interviewed.
Thank you very much. It was a very cool experience.
Can we Google it and find it?
Yes, you can. I also wanted to say on Mr. Zdanowicz's point about the American Legion, I just wanted to mention, as they said, I did have the opportunity to attend Girls State this summer, and I was just blown away by talking to other girls, all very intelligent, and amazing to me that I found out, I had all my meals paid for and opportunities to meet with Senator Blumenthal, Denise Merrill, all these amazing public figures, as well as having an amazing time learning and interacting with the government process. And it was $350 for me to attend, and that was covered by the American Legion. So it was really great that that's kind of, they raised that money so that anyone, regardless of socioeconomic background, is able to attend. So I thought that was a really important point to bring up about the really great work they do. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I thought you were reaching for your... That's wonderful. And we have been passing around the newsletter, but you are in it. It's very cool, your letter. Thank you both. Okay, announcement of future meeting dates. Tuesday, October 16th is our next meeting in Town Hall at 7 o'clock, and I should say, if I'm not mistaken, since everybody keeps asking, that we will have a presentation on the start times question. It will not be a vote, but it will be the final presentation about the timing requests that we had set, that we'd proposed, and what the ramifications might be. The next meeting will be on a Wednesday, because of Election Day, November 7th. Otherwise, other than the fact that it's a Wednesday, it's the same place, and same time here at 7 o'clock. And then on November 20th is the third meeting, back to the Tuesday, again here at 7. Are there any requests for future agenda items? Comments from visitors? Mr. Bryant, here's your chance. Okay, there's no executive session, so can I hear a motion to adjourn, please? So moved. Second? Vote with your feet. We're adjourned.